Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome. I'm Stephen Johnston. I'm Chief Customer Officer at Voicescape, and I'd like to welcome you to this, our first in a series of webinars that we're hosting, focused on the importance of resilient relationships in social housing. In terms of the inspiration for this series, we did a piece of research at Voicescape that we undertook shortly after lockdown was enforced, the findings of which was captured in our response recovery resilience report that's available via our website. So at Voicescape, our focus is on developing technology that better helps social landlords build sustainable tenancies through better customer engagement. So when lockdown happened, we were immediately interested in what impact those quite extreme circumstances might be having on that dynamic. And through that research, not just with our customers, but with our customers, social landlords, tenants themselves, we gleaned a range of insights, but by far the strongest theme to come through that piece of work was the increasing importance of the landlord-tenant relationship, the role that it has to play in building sustainable tenancies, but also in establishing strength, a buffer against current and future challenges. So that's the focus of our webinar today. We've managed to attract a fantastic array of speakers to share their insights on that topic. We'll be kicking off with Jenny Osborne, MBE from TPAS, Chief Executive at TPAS. We'll also be welcoming Andrew Kidds, who's the Director of Customer Experience. And then with whatever time we have left, I'll be filling in at the end with some of the key insights that we've developed at Voicescape through our research in relation to customer engagement and that fundamental importance of the customer, the landlord-customer relationship. We'll be running a question and answer session after each of the speakers, so we won't be saving everything up till the end. So please do feel free to be posting questions as and when you feel fit throughout the presentations. You'll notice up in the right-hand side a number of tabs there. We've got the questions tab, which speaks for itself. Please use that to be submitting questions throughout. I'll be collating these as we go through, and then we'll field those to the speakers when we've finished their sessions. You'll also notice the polls tab up there in the right-hand corner. Please keep an eye on that. We'll be running a few different straw polls throughout the course of the session, so it'd be interesting to get your views on there. So keep an eye out for the red dot appearing up there when we post a new poll. You'll also see the chat facility up there that allows you to speak to other attendees at the webinar, and we've got Mohammed in that chat room from Voicescape who will be fielding any other queries you have about the session. So finally, if you'd like to comment on the session through social media, or you want to submit any questions to us through social media, please do feel free, and the hashtag is Voicescape Thought Leaders. Okay, so given that there's no fire drill to announce or toilets to direct you to, as we would do with a live event, I think it's time for us to crack on and hand over to our first speaker. As I mentioned, Chief Executive at TPAS, the Tenant Participatory Advisory Service. We have been very familiar to most of you already, I'm sure, Jenny Osborne, MBE, who will be talking about how COVID-19 has the potential to reframe the landlord-tenant relationship. So without further ado, if I could hand over to you, Jenny.
Oh, well, thank you to Stephen, and thank you to Voicescape for inviting me here today to speak. It's a real pleasure to be able to talk to you all today. My name's Jenny Osborne. I'm the Chief Executive of TPAS, who we are the tenant engagement experts working across England. And I'm here really to talk about our perspective, our reflections on about three things I'm going to try and cover today. So I'm going to focus really in terms of the landlord-tenant relationship. I'm going to focus a little bit back on what's gone on over the last 6 months, obviously. So I'll talk a little bit about that. And obviously that will feed into what I think is going to change over in the future. Talk a little bit about the kind of the more immediate things we've seen change around engagement. And then I'll also talk and I'll end around the kind of the policy landscape. So to give you that kind of TPAS perspective, what the bigger issues may be around how tenants and landlords will work together in the future. So hopefully that's okay for everybody. So in terms of sector response, well, I mean, I think generally, I think you'll hear more on this from the speakers that follow me, but I think generally we can say it's been good. I think, if we take ourselves back to those early days in kind of March and April, a lot of activity across the sector. I think, again, we'll hear a lot about this, I'm sure, and you've already done so, but we've seen a lot of interest, haven't we, in the phone calls. Who would have thought that the humble phone call would come back into vogue in the way that it did, in terms of the primary way of connecting with tenants again? I think those phone calls were really well received in the main from tenants that we spoke to and speaking to organisations. And I think the key thing around that was the amount of information that we gleaned from that. Didn't we learn, who was living in our homes, what their needs were, who they were already connected with, what they were doing in their community. We found out lots of information. So from that perspective, really impressive, really good. I think as well, if I had £1 for every time people have said to me, another aspect of that was important was reconnecting. So housing staff saying to their chief execs, Lincoln Eck, it's been lovely to get back talking to tenants again. It's been lovely to be able to do my job again, talking to people, hearing what they've got to say, and then crucially, being able to act on things, to do something, to make a difference, to put something in place for people. And I think, again, as a sector, we need to take that learning forward and remember that staff have really welcomed engaging back in a face-to-face, be it over the phone or whatever way, with the communities in which they work. And that's really crucial that we remember that as part of our response. I've mentioned loads of new data, got loads of that, haven't we now? So I think the challenge now for us all is, what do we do with it? Where do we use that information? It'll have exposed some gaps that we had in our information, that's fine. We now should have plans to fill those gaps and to do something with that data for the future. I think the other thing I've said a few times, if you've heard me speak before, is it was too quick to get tenants involved in the plans once we went into lockdown. That all happened so fast, didn't it? We just had to react and deal with it on a day-to-day basis. What I've been urging people to do, though, is making sure, as part of strengthening that tenant-landlord relationship, tenants are involved in the recovery plans, the transformation plans, the resilience plans, whatever you're calling them, that we make sure as we come out, and even if we go into fluctuations of local lockdowns up and down, it's going to be so important to make sure tenants are part of the recovery plan in the future. So if we think as well about the community response, I'll just briefly touch on this. Again, I think it's all been said before. It's not just been about the landlords, has it, in the sector? The communities in many cases just got on and did things for themselves, often before landlords or councils did. And I think that's important to remember that, again, as we go forward. We are not always, as landlords, just the rescuers of people. It's a narrative we need to drive out from the sector. Communities are resilient in their own way. Communities react in their own way, and we have to make sure we respond to that. But hasn't it been wonderful to see some of the response that we've had? Real thriving community spirit in places. I think the questions we now have to ask ourselves are, how do we support that in the future? How do we supplement it? How do we help perhaps fund it? Or how do we get out the way and leave those community groups to get on with what they've been doing, probably far better than some of us were able to do? I think the thing that's interesting and we have to react to now as time goes forward is the growth in online communities as well as our physical communities. So, of course, in the early days, we saw an explosion, didn't we, of kind of Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups starting up. Where are they now? And how do you, as landlords, how do all of us in the sector connect with those, as well as the kind of physical community groups that are out there as well, restarting back up again? So that balance of those two will be interesting. But I think the big thing, isn't it, now we all know, is what is going to be the impact on communities for the long-term future in terms of mental health, in terms of job losses, in terms of furlough is ending. So, poverty, we've got to really think about kind of ongoing support for our communities. I think the other thing, again, I'll try and be quick on this, but I think, I think for many people, it's been a real time of positive relationships with local authorities and partnership working. And again, we can build on that, can't we, now for the future? I think we've been able to demonstrate in many cases what practical impact local action can have. I hope that will lead to driving out some duplication in the future. I hope it will enable us, as I said before, to support other people's efforts better, where they're doing it better, that time to step aside. I think we've seen things like, and we'll continue to see things like stock swaps across the sector increasing in order to make sure that we can deliver services better for our residents. So Paradigm, Guinness in particular, I know I've seen, but there's been plenty of others. And I'm not saying from that small is necessarily better in terms of landlord size, but I do think the importance of being able to deliver locally is going to be more crucially important. So I think we'll see far more of that. We need to make sure in our structures we can connect locally with the people in our homes when we need to, because we don't know what's going to happen, do we, in the future. And then the other one is around decision making. I think it's had an impact over the last few months. I think for many of us, for staff, for board members, for involved tenants in particular, it's laid bare, hasn't it? Some of the inequalities that are in there in our society, not just around housing, but across society generally. And I think we've got to be honest and upfront now about how we tackle those inequalities as board members, as staff members, as involved tenants in the future. What are we going to do? I think as a board member myself, I found it, really interesting around all the stuff, certainly in the early days, around compliance. How are we going to get in people's homes for our gas checks? It's kind of put a human story around all of those reports that I get as a board member, and I hope it has for other people. There's a human story behind every not refusal for access. But I think it's also shown some of the pressures that our contractors are under in terms of working in our communities, and we have to be mindful about that. And some of that, I think we can adapt our processes for the future, can't we? I think in terms of decision making about where we invest in the future, that's been thrown into sharp relief, hasn't it? Where are we going to spend our resource in the future around digital? And I'll come to that a bit more later. The quality of our temporary accommodation, is it good enough? What can we do better from that in the future should we have this again? And what can we do even more than we have been doing to improve our repair service for our tenants? We can make decisions faster when we want to. Again, if I've had £1 for every time someone said to me, Jenny, we implemented in 2 days what I thought was going to take us 2 years. We had a strategy and we did it so quickly. Well, I'm not saying that's going to happen for everything, because we're not going to be in a pandemic, hopefully, as like this again. But I do think it shows that when we need to, we can put systems aside and we can get on with things that doesn't have to be 100% right. They can be 80% right, and we can put things right afterwards. So I think pushing on that, tenants will push on that. But I think we've all got incumbent on all of us to say, what can we do to make decision making faster, more accountable, more in real time, and more based on local insight and local information? I think that's exciting, but we can do more of that. And then, finally, a final slide really on this bit is looking at the future of the office. What will this mean for our future relationship with tenants and how we will work as staff? There'll be different dynamics, I think, come out of this in terms of we're not all working from offices in the same way. I took some learning from this. A couple of people mentioned to me, staff and tenants. Tenants have said during this, I really hated going to the office, actually. Some of these big corporate flashy offices that we've got in the sector, actually, what did that used to do for people that were walking in those buildings to a boardroom to have a meeting with a lot of staff lined up on one side of a room and tenants on the other? Did we really do that well? Did we really make that a good environment for collaborating and learning and sharing stuff? I think we'll have to reflect on that. I think what we've got now, very different decision making when tenants and staff are both equally sat on a Zoom call at home in their own offices, on their own settees. That makes for decision making and collaboration to be quite different. So I think that's equalised out some things. So what will we miss? If we don't all go back to the offices in quite the same way? Well, that's to spin out, isn't it, and to see. But I do think how we're going to work a bit more equally will be interesting. Okay, so if we just kind of move on now really to have a think about how engagement has changed. I mean, this is still obviously a work in progress, isn't it? But a few things I suppose I've mentioned really here. The first, clearly, obviously, is going to be about going digital. I mean, that has catapulted forward in the time since March. In particular, we saw scrutiny teams moving online and continuing to run scrutiny projects through those months. Now, that probably would have taken weeks or months to get people to agree to doing that if this hadn't happened. And I think that's really positive, because what people are reporting back to me is that what they're able to do is have more meetings quicker. You can get more people involved. You can get decisions made quicker. So rather than waiting another 3 months for everyone to come to a face-to-face meeting and get everybody organised and take loads of time out of people's diary, we can have a meeting, can't we, in another 2 or 3 weeks, and we can move some of those actions forward. And rather than, again, trying to coordinate diaries of lots of people and heads of housing and whoever else you might want to call to a meeting, we can usually now get in people's diaries a lot quicker because people aren't travelling and it's on a 45-minute Zoom call. So I think that's really, really helpful. I think that is, we're hearing that from many, many people, that it's making things a bit sharper in how people can engage. And it's not just scrutiny groups, it's other groups as well. Obviously, I mentioned before, Facebook groups, WhatsApp groups are all joining up and starting to link together and putting people in touch in a way they haven't been before. But I think one of the downsides, obviously, of digital, and I'm sure many people are experiencing this, I hope you can read that slide, is that digital and access is a problem for lots of people as well. There's some figures there from the Lloyd's Digital Index, but I think, so it's not just a housing issue, it's across society. We've got some real issues in digital engagement, haven't we? We're going to have to address if we want to make this work for the future. We've got issues around infrastructure of digital access. We've got the resources themselves, have people got the right equipment to be able to do it? Can people afford to have internet in their homes? And if they can't, what are we going to do about that? And then obviously there's an issue around skills as well that we need to address. So it's not just it's not a sort of an easy win, this around digital engagement, but it is here to stay. We all know that. It's a huge opportunity for engagement, but we've got to have a serious conversation about who's going to pay for it and who's going to fund it. It does give us, though, huge flexibility as organisations, so we need to bear that in mind in terms of a value for money agenda. And we've got to capitalise, haven't we, here, that we can get to other tenants like we've all been asking for years. How do we get more tenants involved? Well, this is one of the ways we can do that, because we can get people involved faster, for shorter periods of times, and in ways they want to be engaged and in ways they're comfortable with. So that value for money agenda around digital engagement has got to be an argument I think we could all win and all do something about quite successfully. What else has been happening over this time? Well, if I sort of talk a little bit about from a TPAS perspective, we've kind of renamed some of our consultancy work that we've been doing around re-engineering engagement. And I think that's where kind of most people seem to be landing now, wanting to talk to us about taking this time to say, we've learned so much over this time. We realise we want to get closer to our tenants. We realise we want to hear even more from people we hadn't heard from before. How do we do that? How do we create the structures in our engagement practices, in our engagement culture, to really, really start again and really kind of motor through on this and make a difference quickly. So we've been talking to lots of organisations on this and talking about, particularly around hearing from those voices that you don't always hear from. I think that's always something people are looking to hear about. We've been using a new kind of structure to sort of talk about that, a new kind of model, if you like, a new pyramid to talk about that. Hopefully it's kind of self-explanatory. But, one of the outcomes from the Social Housing Green Paper in 2018 was to make sure that people had engagement frameworks that were really open, transparent and accountable, but really able to evidence and really demonstrate how tenants have been listened to. And part of what this pyramid's about is about really showing that. So hopefully it's helpful for the sector. I'm really hearing a lot more from people about how can we prove that we are hearing from people and what they've got to say. Just excuse me while I move some notes slightly along. It's they just fell down, but there we go. That's what happens on these meetings, isn't it? So I think these accountability models, they've got to involve the board, haven't they? They've got to involve our governance structures, senior managers, senior staff, all staff actually, to make sure tenants' voices are heard at all parts of the business. We want to see engagement, I think, don't we, all of us, for the future that really does influence, challenge, change services as a result of tenant involvement. I think this model tries to set some of the guidance to doing that. So obviously at that kind of be aware level at the top, that's for all residents. We all want, in some ways, our tenants to be aware of who we are and some of the things that we've got out there. And that might literally just be that they're aware, that we've got a call centre. It might be that they're aware they can get an annual report from us, whatever it might be, a conversation. That's all it might be. And then as the funnel changes, we get more levels of involvement, but probably from less people, and that's fine. That's how it should be, isn't it? People might want to kind of opt in a bit more. So yeah, I'm happy to be contacted every so often on this, or people might chip in with doing surveys, step walkabouts, whatever it might be. And then we move up to the kind of more involved engagement that people would probably associate as the kind of more traditional sort of stuff, but isn't really. It's just because it's more formal structures and it's less people involved. it's still part of this whole pyramid of engagement where we might get tenants involved in co-designing new services from the start. We'll get people obviously in scrutiny involved. We'll get people taking part in AGMs or whatever it might be. So we move through that. And then we end obviously with kind of the real leading that might go on, probably particularly from tenant board members, but also increasingly across the sector, we are seeing the rise of kind of subcommittees of the board, but with real delegated powers to talk about customer facing services with budgets and with responsibilities to really hold the main board to account on, are you actually doing what you say you're going to do in terms of listening to tenants? So I think that's a structure we can start to look at far more in the future. And then finally on this section is around where's the evidence, and that's linked, isn't it, to all of what I've just talked about in the pyramid before. As one of my consultancy managers says, it's much harder to dismiss evidence. It's easier to dismiss opinion, and I think that's somewhere about it encapsulates some of the criticism of engagement has been over the years, isn't it? Oh, it's just the opinions of a few tenants that are involved. Well, those opinions are valid. But yes, of course, what we want to do is widen that out and make sure we're hearing the opinions of lots of people, but also supplement that with the data and the analysis that we should be getting in now, and we are far more capable of doing in our organisations. Our mantra should be far more, can we test it? Can we prove it? And that real evidence-based challenge that I think we need to embed in the sector, drawing on that range of data, range of insight from far more people, is a mindset that we've got to create now in our staff, in our boards, and in our tenant base. It should be about both of those things, shouldn't it? Qualitative and quantitative information that are all feeding in all different parts of the business to create a mindset, a culture that says, I am going to make sure that what we do, how we change our services, is based on what tenants are telling us from a range of perspectives. And then that comes back to something we've talked about a lot, haven't we, since Grenfell? Are we really ready to listen? And I think, again, the pandemic has thrown that again into sharp focus for us. And I think generally tenants would say, well, this isn't complicated. All you've got to do is listen to us and get to know us and what we need and what our requirements are by doing that. If you really listen, we spend a lot of time, I think, in the sector spending money, sending staff on and involve tenants on courses for how to write reports, give presentations, facilitate. It's all about transmitting, isn't it? I think we need to gain better skills as a sector, all of us, and create that time to really, really, truly listen, to hear what tenants are telling us, and also those that aren't talking out. What by not speaking out are they saying, in a way, I suppose? We've got to create the mechanisms, we've got to create the culture, we've got to create the systems that can hear voices that are speaking out, but also using that, what we're being told in other ways across all different mechanisms to tell us what tenants really do want. Okay, so just to kind of get to the final part really of my presentation, you'll be pleased to hear, I'm sure. It's just around the policy environment. Just very quickly want to kind of bring it to that level. All of that's been going on over the last 6 months, but where are we in terms of the rebalance of the tenant and landlord relationship from a policy perspective? Well, certainly over the last few months, I'm sure none of you can have failed not to have heard from Fiona McGregor, from the regulator, over the last few months. She's been very clear, I think, in her messaging, what she's been saying in about what people should be getting on with, what people should be doing. I can't believe there can be a board member or a staff member out there in the sector that isn't sure of the direction of travel of the regulator. They are going to take a far bigger interest in tenants and the tenant experience. I think, again, what's been great about this period of time is, tenants have heard from Fiona themselves. They've heard from the regulator and lots of other people in the sector, so they know it too. So they've not had to miss out by not being able to trundle down to London for big sector conferences. What's happened over the last 6 months, we've been able to hear from a wider range of voices, and tenants have heard that directly. So I think tenant board members in particular have a real role to play here in ensuring that boards are getting this, that the regulator is going to take this really, really seriously in the future. I think the other example from the sector that's been really moving forward at pace over this time is the Housing Ombudsman. We've got a new code for handling complaints, and I think that's really important. I think it's a great step forward. I think it's been well received by the sector and was much needed, definitely. It should lead to faster handling of complaints, better handling of complaints. It should help to drive out, I think, in the future, some of that incessant delay that some organisations insisted on putting into the complaints process to try and stifle complaints and send them in an ever-going loop that never got resolved. We've seen the Ombudsman, haven't we, recently naming landlords, particularly this in the last week or so, around handling of leaseholder complaints. We know we can all do better on that, long overdue, and we must do that. So all of this will continue to grow from the Housing Ombudsman Service, and that's powerful. And again, tenants, boards and staff will need to make sure they're responding to that. I think the other things that are going on, obviously, are a few things. The most important, obviously, being the Grenfell Tower inquiry is still ongoing. Loads of learning still to come from that. Loads of shocks, I'm sure, still to come in what we're going to hear in some of the evidence. That remains massively high on the agenda, and rightly so. And we have to keep pushing for the change we need from that. Obviously, the building safety bill is out at the moment, and so that huge focus for boards, both from the safety perspective, rightly so, but also from the cost perspective that it will bring in terms of what we need to put right across our stock. TPAS is obviously focused on the resident involvement, the resident engagement side of the bill and the strategies that will be put in place. We'll be keeping a close eye on that and hope and bringing our expertise to how we can make that the best we can possibly make it. But again, it's like everything we've talked about before. Let's do it with tenants. Let's do it with consultation. Let's do it properly, and let's make sure everybody's part of that conversation. And I'm sure TPAS, like many of you, responded to the NHF's Code of Governance consultation last week. We're really broadly supportive of the NHF Code. Again, big step forward. So all of these things are coming together, aren't they, to say the tenant-landlord relationship has to be rebalanced, has to be reset, and has to be better than it has been in the past, and that's really positive. I think the final point, though, really to end on is the white paper that we hope is coming in November. I think everyone in the sector is saying November, so we're going to look really stupid if it doesn't happen then, but I think it is. And the progress on the previous slides that I've mentioned, from the regulator, the Ombudsman, and the code, all of this, this is an all part of leading up to the real final changes we want to see from a white paper that delivers. All those tenants that contribute to the roundtables with the ministers and has contributed online over the last 3 years since Grenfell have made it very clear that they want to see regulatory change, that we need to see regulatory protection and support. We want to see increased consumer regulation. We want to see it measured, and then we want to see it acted upon. And we think that's coming in the white paper in some way. And that will drive change, of course it will. But for me, the overriding thing is culture. As Fiona's been saying, you don't need to wait for the white paper. You should have been doing lots of this already. Get your culture right in your organisation. Whatever the regulation brings, you can get that right with having the right culture and driving that with your staff, with your tenants, with your board. It really is an exciting time for engagement. We've got so much we've got right in the past, but now what we can do is focus on getting even more right with that regulatory change behind us as well. Thank you very much, everybody, for listening.
Thanks for that, Jenny. Really fascinating. It's always good to hear you speak, and the passion you bring as far as a representative of the tenant voice goes. So thank you for that. Really interesting. I would encourage people who are tuning in to submit some questions for Jenny. We don't need to wait till the end of the presentation to submit questions through the questions tab. I do have enough of my own to keep Jenny busy for quite a while yet, but whilst we're doing that, if you guys out there have anything you'd like to put to Jenny, please do put that in the questions tab. So loads to go out there, Jenny. Really interesting perspective on the customer and a relationship through the lens of engagement. Now, one of the key things there, as you mentioned, is the explosion in digital that we've all seen over the past few months. And I see that that's creating certain opportunities in terms of tenant engagement. But what do you think are the pros and cons of digital engagement within your context?
Yes, I've had to put my headphones on, sorry, so I look a bit stupid now. But anyway, Yeah, I mean, God, haven't we been talking about this for months and months and months about? And I think we'd got to a place in the sector that said, of course, it's got to be a blend. It's got to be a blend of digital and face-to-face. What happened in March was we just catapulted to the other extreme of going digital, didn't we? Digital only, which has had its benefits, like I said earlier in the presentation, about getting loads of people online, getting people comfortable with it, getting people understanding this is a way of working that doesn't need months and months of planning and protocols. And, people do behave on digital. All those things we were worried about, they didn't materialise, did they? Of course, everybody's now saying, sort of 5-6 months in, we want to get back to some face-to-face, and that is dead important. So I think, what we've now had foisted on us is you will make a blend of digital and face-to-face, and we can make it work. And we're sort of in the right place to do that. So there's benefits of COVID, but one of the things that's happened is that. So digital, I think, like I mentioned, digital is great for getting more people involved at different times, different people, different age groups, all of those things. That's great. We've got so many of our tenants now working from home, haven't we? So, now it's a time to test our theories of, it's always been because we couldn't get people to come out at night or to come out in the workday. Well, let's test that now. Let's see if that was the reason people didn't want to get involved with you. I suspect there's probably other reasons. There'll be, nobody's forgotten the whole trust issue that we've still got to work on and build before people even want to try and connect with you. I think some of the work that we've done in the behavioural insight work that we've done with yourselves is around, the language we use about people. That's not changed just because we're doing it in a digital way rather than face-to-face. When we talk about engagement, involvement, empowerment, is that really landing with anybody? And I think from a digital perspective, to get people engaged, we really need to think about the language we use and make sure that it's inviting, it's welcoming, it's understandable, it entices people to want to get involved. So I'll answer the question. I just think it's exciting. I think there's also just inevitably a need as the next few weeks unfold and months to get people back face to face. My worry, and I think it's human nature, it's not specific about engagement, is people need to build relationships with people. And that's important. And you can do a lot of that over these kind of things. I think certainly for very involved tenants in particular, or tenants that want to come to talk to you about, let's say, service failures, or to help you co-create something quite in depth or complicated, I think we're still going to want to employ some face-to-face methods for that. So it's nothing more complicated than let's get this blend right now. We've got the chance to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Is there a risk, do you think, now that landlords potentially have experienced how easy or how much easier it is to engage customers through digital channels? And I'm thinking of that kind of tenant voice type of engagement that TPAS specialise in. Is there a danger that providers may start to rely on that now, and there's only certain sorts of engagement that you can get through face to face, and we start relying too much on digital and lose that really kind of more substantial stuff that we can get through face to face? Am I being a bit cynical, or is there a risk that providers are going to move in that direction? It becomes a bit tokenistic.
No, I think you're right. I think you're absolutely right, and I think that's what this is the time now, isn't it, to reflect on some of those. What will there's always a gain and there's always a loss, isn't it? And what could we lose by just trying to do all our changing of services, all of that on Zoom? I think there's a danger it pushes people too fast. I think it's a danger that it asks people to kind of look at things and not have the chance to in-depth check them out and research them. We all know a lot of conversations or bits of information are gleaned before a meeting or after a meeting or as you walk into the car park. And I don't think, and that's not being trite, I think those are important factors in service design, in a relationship that's collaborative of people working together. So yeah, I think we have to make sure that, because I think there's a danger that people might say, you've done all this digital now, we're investing, we're going to keep investing, to make kind of that money stack up, then we need to move to just digital only, and it's quicker. And actually that's false economy, isn't it? it is without a doubt, we're human beings and we need to meet face to face for the bigger stuff that needs real relationship building. You don't build relationships as easy, do we, like this?
No, exactly. We have had a question from the audience, and this question relates to those customers who potentially have vulnerabilities or other reasons why digital engagement for them is very, very difficult, if not impossible. And just wondering, Jenny, do you have any best practice examples or any knowledge of what NatFed are doing or housing providers themselves to support those folks as this shift towards digital might be leaving them behind a little?
I think, I'm not sure what the NatFed are doing, particularly. I can't speak for them. In terms of, I think it has been a real shock for people, again, mentioned on that slide earlier about digital access. I think there's been quite a few organisations that have been surprised. So if I just talk from an engagement perspective, which is what kind of I know, then, we had a lot of engaged tenants that were good at, that had access to, email, that had access to being able to contribute in that way, could download documents maybe and all of that. But actually, when we had to switch very quickly to all of this kind of technology, it was hard. It was hard to train people to do that, and it was not everyone had the internet provision or what other equipment to do that. So I think it's I think most house providers I've spoken to are taking this seriously now about how are they going to put in place some strategies to help people. And I think like I mentioned, it's about, and I know Hacked, for example, I mentioned, are talking about this from a community perspective. How are we going to do this seriously in the future if we haven't got people that have got the right connectivity? So how, reading an article today in Inside Housing about if we're going to build homes, if we're going to convert office blocks to homes in the future, we've got to do that by putting better internet connectivity in, haven't we, from the start? So I think we've got to have some serious conversations about money and about the funding of this. It cannot be a hand-wringing exercise and going, someone else will pick this up. I think if we're serious about wanting to help our tenants, be it engagement, be it with income, be it with anything, then we as housing providers have to put some money on the table to help them get connected in the way that we would want them to be.
Exactly. It's the bottom line in terms of investment, isn't it? Definitely. You mentioned the white paper there, Jenny. Now, I know TPAS and yourself particularly are very active as far as lobbying goes and taking that campaigning and lobbying role. Obviously, we're looking for increased consumer regulation from the white paper, but what does that mean specifically? What specifically would you like to see coming out of that white paper?
Yeah, like I said, this is going to be a culmination, I think, of lots of things that have been pincering towards a better deal for tenants. I think we will hopefully see something around a C1 regulation. We will want to see a proactive regulator who is looking at this, is asking for evidence of how tenants have been involved in the decisions that affect them. So I think we're going to see a suite of KPIs, probably of some kind, that we will be asked, providers will be asked to report against. How much of those will be kind of qualitative rather than quantitative stuff? I don't know where that balance is going to land. We were involved in some work early on to help with that. We did some tenant roundtables about what was important to tenants, that balance of the two. Where that'll end up landing, I don't know. But every indication is coming that we are going to see providers having to proactively give evidence of how tenants' voices have been heard at board level, how they've implemented services, and that tenants can then raise that when that's not happened. So that is the step forward that we want to see, the regulator proactively regulating consumer issues.
Okay. And coming from a different direction in a sense, but some folks in the sector would argue that as far as investing in customer relationships goes, actually kind of pounds and pence investment, we've got to put something behind this. The social housing sector not necessarily exposed to the same sort of market forces that a commercial sector organisation might be, in terms of let's invest in customer relationships so that we can increase revenue, we can extend revenue, we can extend loyalty, etc., those commercial factors. If you were sat in front of a hard-nosed FD who was saying, why should I do this? What would your response to him be? How would you convince him or her?
I think, there's the ESG agenda, so some people will be very interested in that. So I think there's that side, but put that to one side. I mean, TPAS talks about, what engagement is about saving money, improving services and long-lasting change for communities. And that, for me, just sums it up. Engagement does save money. I think, Paul Hackett is the person that describes this best from Optivo. He talks about when, with their tenants, they overserved. They did too much. It was ridiculous. Tenants didn't want it. So I think, if you're a hard-nosed FD, to be told, actually, we could cut some things out here. We don't need to do half of that. Don't want it. That's the primary driver. I think I talked before about driving out duplication. Tenants will spot that quicker than anybody else. Where is somebody else doing this better? So there's a hard-nosed answer for an FD to say we can drive that out. But ultimately, I just think we've got so many examples where scrutiny in particular, and I think that's the key one here, has looked at a service for not much money. It doesn't cost a lot of money to run a scrutiny panel, let's be honest here. We'll look at a service, look at it in detail, and make you thousands of pounds worth of savings just by getting their involvement. My favourite again is always from Optivo. It's an old one now, but it's a goodie. It's £25,000 a year saved just because tenants looked at the rent statement and said we could design this better, we could send it out with information better. If people need hard-nosed figures, there's plenty in there in the sector.
Excellent. Okay, that's all been fascinating, Jenny. Thank you for joining us. Really interesting presentation, loads of insights to take away, and thank you for fielding the questions as well.
Thank you.
Okay, so we'll move on with the agenda. Piping in the folks from Onward. Still some technical issues that we're dealing with there. Luckily, Andrew Kidds, who's the Customer Experience Director at Onward, pre-recorded his 5-minute section, so we can move on to Andrew's contribution. As I mentioned, in the background, we're working a way to get Bronwyn piped in as well afterwards. Again, this is a recorded session. Don't currently have Andrew on the line. Feel free to keep posting questions, however, because any questions that go unanswered within the questions tab, we will be following up this session with answers to all questions, and we can engage with presenters outside of the webinar to make sure those questions are answered. Okay, so if at that point I could hand over to Andrew Kidds, who, as I mentioned, is the Customer Experience Director at Onward Homes, who'll be talking about their experience of customer relationship through the COVID period.
Thanks, Stephen, for the introduction. A significant part of the Onward journey and culture is the importance that we place on building relationships with our customers. And in becoming Onward in 2017, we worked extremely hard to bring the value of past relationships and services with us. We consulted extensively as we became a single organisation to help us understand the views, opinions and diversity of our customer base. And many of those relationships continue to remain strong today. So lockdown began on the 23rd of March 2020 and almost everything ground to a halt. Albeit with some level of general disruption and following the government lockdown guidance, many of our customers were able to continue their lives independently. But we knew we couldn't make that general assumption for all of our customers. The outlook for many was uncertain, and as services closed down or were either scaled back, we recognised that we needed to be there for our customers more than ever. With many aspects of our lives changing overnight, we needed to ensure our customers were safe, secure, and that they had access to any support should they need it. We knew we had the resources and the technology in place to maintain engagement throughout and to put plans in place that we knew could make a difference. So what did we do? So utilising existing technology and through the Voicescape platform, we were able to generate over 20,000 automated calls and SMS text messages every month, a scale and reach that we simply wouldn't have been able to achieve through manual interventions. That contact provided our customers with a regular opportunity to let us know if they needed our help or support. So we generated between April and July almost 80,000 proactive contacts with our customers. In most cases, our customers were fine, and that was around 90% of customers. However, we did have some who needed to hear from us. And the support that we put in place ranged from food parcels, advice about money and rent payments, through to regular weekly one-to-one calls where customers were feeling very isolated or vulnerable. We've received lots of positive feedback from customers in response to the automated welfare calls and messaging. And a recent survey has told us that whilst many customers did remain largely independent, or have remained largely independent, that they did value and recognise the effort that Onward made in reaching out to them. We have been communicating using multiple methods. We've used our website, we've used social channels, we've used the automated approach, we've even used traditional paper methods of communication. And the automated work has received the greatest level of positive feedback. And that has enabled us, we feel, to start to build that new relationship and new levels of trust with our customers. We're now looking at how we can build that into, or the lessons learned from that, into much of our business as usual activity. We've got a huge opportunity now, I feel, to move forward and to bring digital engagement into play to support organisations building new relationships, starting to build resilience and strong levels of trust. And much of that can help organisations, both in terms of organisational efficiency, but more importantly, support the well-being of our customers. And it can help with things such as customers wanting to prioritise their rent payment, engage actively when they do need support, help reduce ASB, and subsequently support the wider communities in which we operate. Thanks.
So as I mentioned, please do feel free to submit your questions through the questions tab. We will be catching up with Andrew and Bronwyn outside of the webinar and ensuring that those questions get asked. Okay, in the meantime, I was due to present some of the insights from our own research as a bit of a wrap up to the session. Then I think we will be moving on to my own presentation and the opportunity to share some of our own insights. Okay, so as I mentioned at the top of the session, as far as customer relationships go, Voicescape is very focused on developing technology that helps social landlords build sustainable tenancies through better customer engagement. I also mentioned that we'd undertaken some research of our own shortly after the lockdown period that did a number of things for us. First of all, it really started to underline the extent to which social housing providers are starting to place that customer relationship at the heart of their businesses, at the heart of their strategies. As I mentioned, not just as a nice to have, but as a strategic asset that is the foundation of the tenancy, and building resilience for those current and future challenges that we might face going forwards. And it's almost like we picked up on something of a mindset shift within the sector as a result of COVID through our research that recognised that maybe it's no longer about having a customer strategy. We've gone beyond that now. It's more about the customer being the strategy, a genuine commitment to put the customer at the heart of everything that we're doing. And what also became clear, and there hasn't been this clarity there, although Jenny spoke very eloquently to this point, is what is the business case for investing in customer relationships? There hasn't been the same clarity within the social housing sector as that there has been in other commercial sectors, as we outlined in the Q&A with Jenny. So we can see how there's always the possibility and the potential for social impact through investing in customer relationships and putting the customer at the heart of everything that we do. We can improve services, and as a result of improving services, we can improve the outcomes that we're having for customers and for their families. But what we found through our research, in addition to the insight that Jenny brought about the more hard and fast commercial impact that we can gain through investment in customer relationships, we started to pick on a few other strands, some key sources of potential commercial impact that drive that business case for investment in customer relationships. And this came through a sense that whilst we may be delivering services in silos, but our customers definitely aren't living their life in silos. They're not experiencing their tenancy in silos. So fair enough, they may be having individual interactions with the income function, with the repairs function, with call center, etc. But from a customer experience point of view, that is just experienced as one tenancy from one landlord. So what that means, and it's coming through in some of the conversations we're having customers, but we're also doing quantitative work to try and isolate some of these relationships as well. What happens is that experience within one service of the business can then impact the customer behavior in other areas of the tenancy. So to take a very blunt example, if a customer has a bad experience of the repairs service and that impacts their customer satisfaction, then perhaps they are less likely to pay, less likely to prioritise rent, maybe less of a propensity to make the effort to be in if we've saddled them with a full day appointment for their gas safety check, etc. So there's the interconnected nature of a tenancy such that if we don't have the underlying customer relationship in place, that levels of dissatisfaction in one area of the business can then be driving demand behaviours in other areas of the business. So there's a hard and fast commercial impact to be gained there through investing in customer relationships to manage demand and to drive to lower cost to serve. So social impacts, but increasing clarity around the commercial impact that we can have through an investment in customer relationships. We're also seeing this trend emerge in relation to how landlords are dealing with their customer satisfaction data also. So we have a range of clients of our own who are using our platform to collect and collate and analyse customer feedback and satisfaction data. And what we're seeing within that customer base, but also wider across the sector, is this journey represented across the bottom from a tactical use of that data through a more strategic use of that data to what we'd consider a more holistic use of that data. And what we mean by that is across at the tactical side there, that we've got landlords who are using customer satisfaction data quite tactically to prevent complaints, essentially, to run a transactional survey, to identify where something's not right or something's gone wrong, and to almost in real time jump on that dissatisfaction, repair the relationship and achieve a resolution. And that's great. That's a solid use of the customer satisfaction data. What we're also seeing, though, is a move towards a more strategic use of that data, where we're looking to identify deeper, stronger trends within the data that may drive opportunities for service improvement. So if there's consistent trends around levels of satisfaction in certain areas, certain aspects of service, then we have a target for investment in that service to improve those outcomes. Way over at the other end, in terms of the more holistic approach, and building on the point from the previous slide, in terms of how levels of satisfaction in one aspect of the tenancy can drive demand behaviours in other aspects of the tenancy, then what we're seeing here, if we're collecting customer satisfaction data from across the tenancy, then it becomes possible to identify where certain types of dissatisfaction are actually triggering certain sorts of behaviour across the population, which then again becomes a very useful resource allocation tool, because where we want to invest is those aspects of service that we can see in the data are starting to drive dissatisfaction and, more importantly, starting to drive demand behaviours. So in terms of this focus on customer relationships within the sector, we're seeing this coming through in some of the conversations and analyses we're having around customer satisfaction data also. So aside from those very general points, there's a few more specific insights that I'd like to jump on that's come out of the research that we've done. This first one is definitely a teaching grandma to suck eggs situation, because I'm sure most people out there are already aware that as far as customer satisfaction goes, and probably as far as the underlying relationship we're having with tenants goes, that you are pretty much your repairs service. So as far as contact volumes, skewing heavily towards repairs, and also as far as the customer satisfaction data goes, then experience and sentiment of the repairs service tends to crowd out consideration of other service touch points also. I'm sure most of us are familiar with that dynamic. So it becomes increasingly important that we get that repairs service right as a foundation for that relationship and those levels of customer satisfaction we have ambitions for. And, you know, fair enough. If you see this from the customer's point of view, it makes perfect sense. Because number one, the repairs service is the crux, is the most tangible, salient interface between the rent they pay and the service that they receive. Obviously, they have the roof over their head and the bricks and mortar, but in terms of that sense of value for money, that sense of what am I getting for my rent, there is hypersensitivity around that repairs service, understandably. And beyond the value for money question, thinking more deeply about the customer experience, then from kind of an emotional perspective, we might think about in terms of stock and properties and assets, but customers are thinking in terms of their home. They're living in the property. So if repairs are substandard or repairs are taking too long to be implemented, then customers are living in that situation. And that's not only an impact on customer satisfaction. In some of the conversations that we've had, then we're picking up impacts potentially on self-esteem, impacts on mental health, impacts in terms of stigma also. So yeah, hypersensitivity around the repairs question, but fair enough if we see it as we should be doing from the customer perspective. So we couldn't not talk about digital, and this will build on some of the points that Jenny has already made as far as the route into customer relationships goes. And I think the main shift that we're seeing here is a move from what used to be the digital default agenda as landlord digital strategies mature to what might be considered a digital by design agenda. And I'll use my mum as an example at this point, if you'll humour me. My mum's a social housing tenant. She has been for, well, since I was 6 months old. Anyway, I'll leave it for you to decide how long that was. It's a long time ago. But my mum's been a social housing tenant, and currently she's pretty fed up with what she feels is the pestering that she's getting from her landlord to be doing stuff online, to pay online, report repairs online, to communicate via web chat rather than ringing the contact centre, etc. So we're seeing a kind of direct negative impact on customer satisfaction and customer relationship in that case, in my mum's sample of one, as a result of a more blanket digital by default approach. But what we are seeing is a more nuanced approach emerging that recognises that getting customers interacting digitally and kind of properly leveraging the value of that agenda is not about maximising digital interaction, it's about optimising digital interaction. What we mean by that is, yeah, let's promote it, but let's ensure that we're focusing on digital interactions from customers and through service touch points that are appropriate for that sort of interaction. So the caveats being there, yes, digital interaction as much as possible, but not where it impacts customer satisfaction negatively and not where it impacts service delivery negatively also. So we're seeing that more nuanced approach of understanding. And you know, at the end of the day, there will still be a significant proportion of customers out there who just want to speak to a human being. And regardless of demographic or digital literacy, there will always be that proportion of customers. And we need to respect that. You know, there's a deep-seated human need to feel listened to feel like my request is being listened to, responded, logged, and it is going to be actioned. And we'll always have that blend, as Jenny mentioned, of the digital and the analog. And like I say, that transcends demographic and digital literacy, really. So we do need to respect that dynamic within the customer base. And that's why at Voicescape, what we try to do is emphasize a distinction between transactional engagement and relational engagement. Now, both of these approaches have their place, but need to be used appropriately in terms of our approach to engaging with customers. So transactional engagements tend to have a short-term focus. They're tactical and reactive. So for instance, a customer misses a payment. So we send them letter one to chase that payment. They are organizational focused. So transactional engagements tend to be about what the tenant can do for the landlord. And they are process driven also. They're driven by internal processes. Relational engagements in contrast, are more strategic. They're focused on investing in the customer relationship, have a longer term focus. They might be proactive in the way that we've seen over the COVID period, where we're proactively reaching out to customers. Many of our clients using our platform for that very purpose, not necessarily looking for something for the tenant to do for us, but maybe being more customer focused and reaching out with something that we can do for the tenant. And in doing so, they're much more insight driven also. They're built around the needs of the customer. So again, coming back to our agenda at Voicescape, this is why in terms of the use of our platform, our technology, what we're looking to do is to facilitate quality conversations to drive that relational engagement. So above and beyond a simple transactional engagement, driving quality conversations that give officers, that give contact center agents the opportunity to arrive at a sustainable resolution of the issue, if that's what it is, but also to take that opportunity to strengthen the customer relationship through that conversation also. Okay, just waiting for my slides to move on. Bear with me 1 second. Excellent. Okay, so in case you're wondering what the title slide refers to in terms of get in touch, stay in touch, be in touch, this relates to some work that we've been doing or some thoughts we've been throwing around in terms of a framework for thinking more strategically about building customer relationships. And as always, it's come straight from the research we've done, both with our customers and our customers' customers. You know, whilst as Chief Customer Officer, my job is to ensure that our customers sit at the heart of everything that we do. Given that our aim is to be engaging with your customers or facilitating your engagement with your customers, we don't feel we can properly do that until we understand the experience from your customer's point of view. So we have done a wide range of research with social housing tenants as part of how we develop our approach and our technology. So this has come directly from customers and in just of recent times, influenced no doubt by the COVID context, an underlying sense that we don't want just those transactional kind of one-off interactions. What the tenants are looking for is more coordinated ongoing engagement as a foundation for that relationship. So a more coordinated program of contact over the course of a period, over the course of a year, etc., rather than just reaching out when something's gone wrong or when the landlord is seeking something from the tenant. And some of the comments that we get from customers, it betrays that sense that you're only in touch when something's gone wrong, or you're only in touch when you want something from me. So there's a desire to be using engagement in a more general sense to underpin that relationship. And in terms of get in touch, stay in touch, be in touch, what this means, like I say, we're trying to develop a more strategic way of thinking about developing customer relationships. So obviously, initially, we need to get in touch. We need to open that conversation, establish that engagement with a customer in the first place. But going beyond that, we need to stay in touch. Not just a one-off engagement, we need to be engaging on a regular basis, outside of hard and fast kind of tactical transactional needs. And then if we're staying in touch, then that gives us an opportunity to be in touch in the sense that we are in touch with our customers. We understand their needs. We are close to their circumstances. And that creates a kind of a thread throughout the entire journey. But of course, in order to execute that strategy, then various different things need to happen underneath. So as far as get in touch needs, the first thing as far as getting touch goes, the first thing we need to do there is ensure that we have quality data. So we need to be maintaining quality data, cleansing it on an ongoing basis. We also need to think about the optimum method of engaging a customer in the first place. So thinking about what is the right method, the right message, and the right moment to be engaging with that customer to maximize the likelihood that they will make contact with us, so that we can make contact with them. As far as staying in touch goes, then, as I mentioned, that's much more about having a proactive, coordinated engagement program rather than just one-off reach outs. And then if through that we can develop and design a high quality customer experience, then that sets the foundation in place for future engagements also. So the staying in touch becomes a kind of a virtuous circle. And then as far as being in touch goes, if we are having those ongoing engagements with customers, then we'll be collecting a range of different data through those contacts. That then gives us the opportunity to convert that data into insight, and then use that insight for a range of different service design, service improvement purposes, all with a view to strengthening that customer relationship through better targeting and tailoring of services. Okay, it's a quick whistle-stop tour of some of the insights that we've developed from our own research. As I mentioned, I've jumped to that and give you the full suite in the absence of Bronwyn and her submission. We do have a couple of questions coming through. I think we've still got plenty of time to go, so if there are any further questions that you would like to submit, please do. So Stephen Evans, have you seen a question from Stephen in the audience? Have you seen any specific measures of satisfaction that you are seeing help a more strategic approach? I think what I'd say to that, Steve, is not necessarily the individual measures of satisfaction, but the key thing for us at the moment is, as I mentioned earlier, understanding how if we're going to take a strategic approach to satisfaction, really unlock the kind of the potential of customer satisfaction data. I think that lies in understanding how that customer experience that's driving satisfaction or not is influencing other behaviours and other factors within the tenancy. And I think in terms of a strategic approach to that data, by understanding that dynamic and then having a better, more refined sense of where we need to invest resource. So if we see, for instance, that not just repairs is driving satisfaction and we can see that that's having a behavioural impact elsewhere, it may be that even within that there are elements of the repairs service. Maybe bad example, but maybe it's not the quality of the repair that matters. Maybe it's the length of time that customers are waiting. We can tease apart those different elements and how they are impacting satisfaction and behaviours across the piece. So I think the real value in that approach is that resource allocation point in terms of understanding where we need to, specifically where we need to invest, where we need to target resource in order to bolster the customer experience, to deliver better outcomes for the customer, but also to from a commercial point of view for the provider to help manage that demand and reduce cost to serve elsewhere in the tenancy. Okay, thanks for that, Stephen. So do we have, I think we've got one more question coming in, I think. It's a thank you from Stephen. Okay, excellent. Okay, folks, so apologies for the technical difficulties that we've had today. As I mentioned, unfortunately, we've not been able to have Andrew or Bronwyn from Onward on the line. If there are any further questions that you would like to submit, then please do. As I mentioned at the top of the session, the hashtag is Voicescape Thought Leaders. So if there's anything else you'd like to submit to us, we will be re-engaging with speakers outside of the webinar and ensuring that everything has been answered, and we will be putting that together as part of a post-session pack. You will also receive a recording of the session as part of the follow-up. And as I mentioned, any further questions will be answered within that context also. Okay, so it just leaves me to thank you for joining us today. Apologies again for the technical difficulties. I hope you found that useful, and we hope to see you again soon.